Welcome back for another Sheriff of Sodium video. Last week, President Trump signed a proclamation that will require a $100,000 fee for all new H-1B visas. The H-1B program is intended to allow American companies to employ skilled foreign workers in positions where American workers with similar abilities can't be found. And it's the preferred visa pathway for many physicians who are not U.S. citizens but want to train and practice in the United States. This announcement has generated a vigorous and often emotional reaction on social media, with some people celebrating and many others expressing grave concern. But unfortunately, much of what's being said isn't well grounded in fact or logic. But if this proclamation does go into effect as written, it will result in some significant changes for graduate medical education in the United States. And you know what that means. It's time to break it down, winners and losers style. First up, a winner: current H-1B visa holders. When this proclamation was announced, there was concern that this $100,000 fee would be an annual fee, or that it would apply to existing H-1B visa holders. However, the White House has indicated that it will not. This will be a one-time fee, and it will apply only to new applicants. So it's worth noting that all of this can change rapidly, with the stroke of a presidential pen. But for now, all the residents and fellows who currently have H-1Bs can breathe easy. Next, we've got another winner: the J-1 visa. Now, if you're watching this video as a U.S. citizen, you may not have ever needed to think very much about what legally you would have to do if you weren't a citizen and wanted to work in the United States. So before I get too far into this video, I probably need to give you a very brief primer. A visa, of course, is the official document that grants a foreign national permission to apply for entry and stay in a country for a specific purpose and time period. And this is very relevant to medicine and medical education because many physicians who work in the United States are not U.S. citizens. In fact, according to the most recent FSMB census, there were 192,000 licensed physicians in the U.S. who were non-U.S. citizen international medical graduates. That accounts for almost 18% of the entire licensed physician workforce. Now, historically, receiving a state medical license has required completing residency training in the United States. And although there were a small number of non-citizens who already held a green card, which allowed them to live and work in the United States permanently, almost all non-citizens who complete residency and fellowship training in the U.S. require a visa. And although some resident physicians have unique circumstances, almost all non-citizen medical trainees in the United States receive one of two types of visa. The first one is the topic of this video, the H-1B. Now, as I said a moment ago, the H-1B is intended to allow U.S. businesses to employ foreign nationals who have highly specialized skills. So most of the news coverage of this proclamation has focused on the impacts on the tech industry because that sector of the economy has become highly dependent on H-1B workers. But people who graduate from medical school in other countries, they also have educational and skill requirements that qualify them for an H-1B. But actually, the H-1B it's the less common type of visa for medical residents. The most common is what's called the J-1. Now, the J-1 program was started in the 1960s by the Kennedy administration, and it's intended to promote cultural exchange by allowing foreign nationals to obtain certain training experiences or occupational experiences in the United States. But there's a catch. This kind of visa ends when your residency is over, and it requires that the visa holder return to their home country for 2 years. Again, although it functions in a different role now, the original intent of the J-1 program was to spread U.S. cultural influence around the world. So you can come here and learn medical skills, but you're supposed to then apply those skills in your country of origin, at least at first. Now, both the J-1 and the H-1B are categorized as non-immigrant visas. But since the H-1B has no requirement that you have to go back to your home country, it makes it much easier for international medical graduates whose goal is really to live and practice in the United States to start working toward a green card. However, with a new six-figure price tag for an H-1B, few, if any, hospitals will be willing to put fellows or residents on that pathway. So the J-1 visa is going to become the preferred pathway, and that's why it's the big winner here. Next, a loser: moonlighting. Now, if you were a doctor whose only goal was to get medical training in the United States. He didn't care what happened after that. Well, then the J-1 and H-1B are pretty much equivalent. So replacing H-1Bs with J-1s won't really change the residency training experience very much. But there is one difference that will have an impact on how programs function, and that's moonlighting. A J-1 visa is intended to support training, so extra work like moonlighting is generally not allowed. The H-1B is a little more flexible. You can generally do moonlighting in your specialty at the same institution as long as it's disclosed. As resident duty hour restrictions have tightened, though, many residency programs have created or they've increased internal moonlighting opportunities for their residents, and nowadays, most of them actually depend on those shifts being filled so they can provide 24/7 clinical coverage of the hospital. But with this shift from H-1B to J-1, programs are going to have to fill those holes in their schedule, and residents are going to have to plug the holes in their wallet. Next up, we got a big loser. Special licensure pathways for IMGs. Now, I told you a minute ago that historically, getting a medical license in the United States meant that you had to complete residency training in the United States. Even if you went to medical school or even did residency training overseas, if you wanted to get a state license, you had to have completed residency training in the United States. But over the past several years, that started to change. Beginning with Tennessee and then moving to Florida, Virginia, Idaho, Texas, Wisconsin, and several other states, legislation has been passed that would allow certain international medical graduates to bypass U.S. residency training altogether and still get a state medical license. Now, the details and requirements of these plans, they vary from state to state, but generally, the programs anticipated that they would enroll international medical graduates who either A, were already legally allowed to work in the United States, or B, would work for an employer who would be willing to sponsor an H-1B visa. Now, a J-1 visa, like we talked about, that's adequate for residency training if the physician is going to be in a training role, like a resident or a fellow, but that's not adequate for an employed physician who would be working through these pathways. So the imposition of this fee is going to dramatically shrink the pool of potential employers for IMGs who otherwise would have been very, very interested in pursuing these pathways instead of doing residency training. In fact, I could see this presidential proclamation making the net effect of these state legislative efforts near zero. Next up, a loser, rich IMGs. I received a message from one person who asked if an international medical graduate could just pay the one-time H-1B fee themselves. Now, of course, this wouldn't be an option for everyone, but many doctors who want to train in the United States have gone to medical school in countries where the cost of attendance is much lower than in the U.S. I mean, the average USMD graduates with a little north of $200,000 of student loan debt, but many international medical graduates have none. And given that physicians in the United States typically earn much more than their counterparts do overseas, if someone even had to take out a $100,000 loan to pay the fee, it would still be a winning financial proposition for some non-citizen doctors. Plus, some international medical graduates do come from families who have financial resources, and the families are willing to use those financial resources to support their child's dream of becoming a doctor in the United States. Some of you may remember my Match Day 2024 video where I highlighted one case that ended up in court after a family paid a hospital $400,000 to secure a residency position for their son, and then the program dismissed him. And so they sued the hospital for breach of contract, and they won. So why can't applicants who wanted to just pay these fees themselves? Well, under the Department of Labor rules, the H-1B fee must be borne by the employer, not the employee. Shifting them from the employer to the employee is illegal because it undermines wage protections. I mean, you can imagine some employers taking the money out of an employee's paycheck as a hidden pay cut. So, unfortunately, even the richest H-1B aspirants are going to be out of luck here. Next up, another loser, top applicant IMGs. Given the differences between the J-1 and H-1B, it's very understandable that almost all IMGs, if they have the choice, would prefer to enter residency on an H-1B. Thing is, while the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates will sponsor a J-1 visa for any IMG who needs one, the H-1B, it requires a sponsoring employer. And even now, there's a lot of red tape and expense involved. I mean, it usually takes hiring an attorney and spending $5,000 to $10,000 for the hospital to get an H-1B for a resident who needs one. So many programs prefer the J-1 visa and don't offer an H-1B at all. In fact, according to survey data, only around 20 or 30% of internal medicine programs offer an H-1B at all. And among that group, though, the reason they offer it is because it's a recruiting tool. It's a way for the sponsoring program to get their favorite applicants to come to their program instead of another program that can only offer a J-1. But now, top IMG applicants are going to have to settle for the J-1 visa because no residency program is going to pay for H-1Bs when they cost $100,000. Now, as an aside, I have seen some silliness online where people have argued otherwise, and they've said that in rare instances, programs might be willing to front this cost to get the top applicants. So let me clear that up for you. This will not occur. If you wanted to convince a hospital administrator to make a financial investment on this scale, you would need to make a financial argument to them. You would need to show them how they're going to make a financial return on this investment. And even if the program director gets a resident that they like better, it doesn't generate a financial ROI. Now, if you want to understand how much residents are worth and the ways that they generate money for the hospital, I have a whole separate video on that, and I'll link to it in the notes below. But for now, what you need to understand is that federal subsidies that get enabled by having residents, they're enabled by having any resident. I mean, CMS doesn't prorate the hospital payment based on whether the applicant was ranked highly on the program's match list or not. Moreover, the extra attending and hospital billing that happens when you have residents, it's really going to be the same whether you have a superstar resident or a minimally competent replacement level resident. Now, there could conceivably, just maybe, be rare instances where there's an ultra prestigious institution who would pay this fee for a singular fellowship candidate who has exceptional clinical experience or research skills because they want to retain that person as faculty and they have a realistic business plan of how they're going to recover their investment. But even something like that would require sign-off by the dean or the CEO, and I simply do not see it occurring. I mean, certainly not on any scale. So even the very best non-exceptional IMG applicants are going to be going through the J-1 system, which is why they are the losers here. Next up, we've got not a winner or a loser, but a push. Residency programs. Because another silly thing that I keep seeing is that this is somehow going to hurt residency programs in general. I mean, after all, 18% of residency positions were filled last year by non-citizen IMGs, so surely residency programs are going to be hurt by this new policy, right? I mean, I don't follow the logic there either, because if you were paying attention a moment ago, you already know that no residency program is going to pay this fee, so it's certainly not going to hurt programs financially. Now, programs that were in the habit of sponsoring H-1Bs as a recruitment tool, yeah, they're going to suffer relatively without that tool. Some of their favorite applicants are going to go elsewhere, but everybody's getting a J-1. And so programs that had been offering the H-1B, they're actually going to save a little bit of money because they'll tell applicants the same thing. That's all we can offer you. Well, I don't know. What about the number of applications that programs receive? I mean, won't the inability to get an H-1B cause some top applicants to not even pursue residency training in the United States in the first place? I mean, I've seen people claim that online too. And I don't know about that. I mean, maybe it will, but I'm very skeptical that even if it does, that it's going to reduce applicants in any sort of meaningful way. And I say that because, you know, choosing to uproot yourself and your family and leave your country and move to the United States and participate in a grueling residency training program, I mean, that's about as big of a life decision as life decisions come. And it is not something that I think any IMG makes lightly. To position yourself as a viable candidate for a U.S. residency spot, you got to plan and work at it for years. So some doctors who graduated from medical schools overseas, they looked at their individual circumstances and their job prospects at home and elsewhere, and they considered that against the whole package deal of work and life in the United States, and they decided, for good reasons, that pursuing U.S. residency training was their best available choice. And other people looked at that same situation, and for one reason or another, they chose against it. And in a decision that's that complex and that heavy, I just am very skeptical that the whole plan would turn on something like getting a particular type of visa. At least I don't think it's going to turn on that for very many people. I don't think programs are going to see fewer applicants. I mean, at least not because of this policy specifically. Now, that said, this individual policy needs to be considered in the context of the president's broader policy agenda, of which limiting immigration is a key component. And it is certainly reasonable to expect that life is going to become more challenging and opportunities are going to become fewer for any visa holder over the next several years at least. And that is likely to result in fewer visa-requiring international medical graduates applying for U.S. residency positions, but I think we're still a long way from that affecting programs. Last year, over 14,000 non-citizen IMGs registered for the match. Only 6,600 of them matched to PGY-1 positions. So there's a long way to go before programs will feel the impact of this proclamation, which is why they're a push. Next, we've got another push: U.S. medical graduates. Much of the general debate about this proclamation centers on how it's going to help American workers who have been unfairly passed over for jobs by companies that are hiring non-citizens on H-1B visas, even though their American counterparts are just as well qualified. And I'm not in the tech industry, and this is not a political channel, so I really don't have anything to say about whether that is in fact occurring or what the relevant trade-offs are if it is. But I will put it to you as an observable fact that the world of residency selection does not function that way. Graduates of U.S. medical schools, they apply to different specialties than international medical graduates. Even within a given specialty, they apply to different types of programs. The best example of that is actually if you look at internal medicine programs. I mean, internal medicine is the top destination for non-citizen IMGs training in the United States. In the past year, if you look at match data, there were more IMGs who matched into internal medicine than every other specialty combined. 34% of categorical IM positions were filled by non-citizen IMGs, and 36% were filled by graduates of US MD schools. So you might think that if we just randomly selected an internal medicine residency program, we would be likely to find one where there were 30-some% of residents who were USMDs and 30-some% who were non-citizen IMGs working in harmony. But actually, you would be decidedly unlikely to find such a program. There are only a handful of them in the country. In fact, you'd be far more likely, if you selected a program at random, to find a program that has all USMDs or all international medical graduates. International medical graduates are not taking residency positions from U.S. medical graduates. They are taking positions that U.S. medical graduates don't want to take. In reality, we have way more residency positions than U.S. medical graduates can fill. In fact, in last year's match, we had 1.97 PGY-1 positions for every graduating MD student. If you add in the DO granting medical schools, then we would still have 1.39 PGY-1 residency positions for every graduating US MD and DO. Now, are there still MD and DO students who don't match? Yes, of course there are. Around 7% don't match in a given year. But that's typically because they were either applying in a competitive field, like a surgical specialty, or they have a significant weakness in their application, like a licensing exam failure or a big academic problem. And then, of course, there's some people who just get unlucky. But whatever the individual reason, it's not because on any scale, residency programs prefer H-1B visa applicants to U.S. medical graduates. It's not because getting an H-1B visa is too easy. International medical graduates, they fill a quarter of all residency positions because we need them to. The positions would be unfilled without international medical graduates. So this policy really changes nothing for U.S. medical graduates, and that's why they go down as a push. Next, we've got one that many people have called as a winner, but I'm also calling it a push: U.S. citizen international medical graduates. Because it's important to remember that there is another group of applicants in the match, and that's U.S. citizens who, instead of attending a U.S. MD or DO granting school, they attended a medical school overseas. Most often, that's in the Caribbean. These applicants face longer odds in residency selection. Last year, only 67% of them matched, which was better than the 58% for non-citizen IMGs, but it's still a long way from the 93 or 94% match rates enjoyed by U.S. graduates. Now, just like non-citizen IMGs, U.S. citizen IMGs typically fill residency positions that wouldn't fill otherwise because of a lack of interest by U.S. medical graduates. So last year, the most common matches for U.S. citizen IMGs were, in order, internal medicine, family medicine, emergency medicine, pediatrics, and psychiatry. And if you swap emergency medicine for pathology, those would be the top 5 specialties for non-U.S. citizen IMGs too. So it's reasonable to believe that non-U.S. citizen IMGs are displacing U.S. citizen IMGs from residency positions. And some commenters are celebrating this as a victory then for U.S. citizen IMGs. But I don't see it. Before we conclude that making an H-1B visa more expensive is going to change anything for U.S. citizen IMGs, we might want to understand why some programs prefer non-U.S. IMGs today, because then we can figure out if that preference is likely to change or not. And in general, I think there are 2 reasons why some programs recruit or even prefer non-citizen IMGs. One is that programs may view non-citizen IMGs as being more qualified. And objectively, I'm going to give you real data. This is true. If you look at data from NRMP's charting outcomes, non-U.S. citizen IMGs who match have an average USMLE Step 2 CK score of 245. Now, that's not quite as high as the average USMD graduate who gets a 250, but it's virtually identical to the DO graduate who averages 244. But actually, even non-citizen IMGs who go unmatched, they have a higher Step 2 CK score than U.S. international medical graduates who do match. It's 240 versus 236. And U.S. citizen international medical graduates who don't match, they have an average Step 2 CK of 228, which falls at around the 8th percentile for a U.S. MD test taker. Now, obviously, the USMLE score is not everything, and there are qualifications beyond that, but I'm just giving you the cold, hard facts here. So reason number 1 that some programs prefer non-citizen IMGs is because they believe that those residents are more qualified. But reason number 2 is that some programs feel that it's easier to have non-citizen IMGs in the program, and at first, that may seem a little bit paradoxical. I mean, after all, if you match a non-citizen IMG, you got to deal with all the red tape around these visa issues. But on the other hand, the visa is a double-edged sword. Some program directors prefer to have residents on a visa because their ability to stay in the country legally depends on their continued employment. I mean, if a program director has a problem with the work ethic or job performance of a U.S. citizen, they can fire them. And it sucks to be fired, especially as a resident. It can be career-ending. But for a non-citizen on a work visa, firing them also results in deportation. The work visa is a big anvil hanging over their head, and it gives the program incredible leverage over these residents. They don't complain as much. I've heard program directors tell me that if they ever have to take a chance on an applicant, they always want to choose a non-U.S. citizen for that reason. Now, whether that's morally or ethically appropriate, that's up for debate. But again, I'm just giving you the cold, hard facts. So what you need to do is ask yourself, do either of these reasons change if a resident is on an H-1B or a J-1? Would program directors suddenly view qualifications differently or perceive that they have less power over a visa-requiring applicant? I don't think so. For whatever reasons programs prefer non-citizen IMGs right now, I think they will continue to prefer them, even if an H-1B becomes prohibitively expensive. And before I close, one final winner, the physician shortage. Now, you already know the physician shortage is absolutely a real thing, right? No doubt. And actually, in any policy debate, simply invoking it is a good enough reason to explain why any initiative that you want is a good thing, actually. We got to do it. There's a physician shortage. Everybody knows that. Now, obviously, if you follow me for any length of time, you know that I'm skeptical of this idea of the physician shortage, and I'm even more skeptical of people who use it to advance their self-serving policy proposals. I got a whole video on that, and if you missed it, I'll put the link in the notes below. But for now, suffice to say, I agree that there are real problems in America with patients who need to access a doctor and they can't. And it is a real problem. But it's not a problem that's going to be fixed by simply graduating more doctors. And that's because what we often call the physician shortage is really a distributional problem that's created by the incentives that doctors have to practice in certain ways, or in certain specialties, or in certain geographic areas, which aren't necessarily the ways that would best serve patients and society. But until or unless you change those incentives, guess what? You can graduate more doctors, and they'll continue to make the same decisions that doctors in the current system do because they have the same incentives, and they'll stack up on each other in cities and suburbs, and they'll keep their clinics packed to the gills, and they'll avoid seeing patients who have public insurance, and they'll continue to do everything else that currently make many people feel like there must be a shortage of doctors because, gosh, it sure is hard to get in to see one. If you want doctors to make different decisions than the ones they're making now, then they need different incentives. And unfortunately, this proclamation will undo one of the best incentives that we've had lately to ensure that patients in rural and underserved areas have access to a physician. So let me explain what I mean. I told you before that the main effect of this proclamation is going to be that the J-1 is going to become the default resident training visa. I mean, even more than it already is. And unlike the H-1B, the J-1 requires a 2-year home residency obligation. But that isn't an ironclad requirement. It can be waived under certain circumstances. And one of those is something called the Conrad 30 program. It's a program that's named after a former Democratic senator named Kent Conrad. And in the early 1990s, he thought that he saw an opportunity for a rare win-win policy. So Conrad was from North Dakota, and obviously that's a very rural state that frequently struggles to attract and retain physicians. And as he was hearing from hospital leaders, Conrad was also seeing the number of international medical graduates who were training under J-1 visas growing rapidly. And then all those doctors, they had to follow this 2-year home residence rule before they could come back to the United States. So they weren't available to fill some of the positions where they might have been most needed. So Conrad proposed that doctors who were willing to work for 3 years in a federally designated shortage area should have their home residence rule waived and get an H-1B visa from their employer. And over the years, this has been a very successful federal program. I mean, at least it's been very successful in attracting doctors to fill positions that otherwise are extremely hard to fill. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, this program's not perfect. I mean, many of the physicians who take these jobs, they leave them as soon as that 3-year work commitment is over. So sometimes it turns into a bit of a revolving door, but over the past 30 years, the Conrad program has nonetheless received consistent bipartisan support from both rural Republicans and urban Democrats who see it as being essential for providing care to the underserved. But you got to realize the employers that sponsor Conrad waivers, they're not exactly rolling in the dough. I mean, we're talking about small community hospitals and rural health centers that are already often struggling. And these entities are probably already the most exposed to other recent changes in healthcare, like the Medicaid overhaul that's in the Big Beautiful Bill. Some of these places are barely hanging on as it is, and now on top of that, they're facing a new $100,000 fee. As a matter of policy, I think that's a bad move. I mean, the Conrad program has delivered 1,000 new physicians a year into rural areas. And these are jobs that USMDs, USDOs, U.S. international medical graduates do not want and will not take. But this program's entire utility hinges on affordable access to H-1B petitions, and now that may end. Now, I say may because I'm not at all convinced that we've heard the last on this issue. Hospitals have a powerful lobby. And insofar as this new fee is going to hurt hospitals who had already previously successfully lobbied state governments for alternative licensure pathways for IMGs so they could lower their labor costs and recruiting costs, I can easily imagine the presidential proclamation being rolled back to exclude hospitals in certain scenarios, and hopefully the Conrad 30 program will be one of them. But if that doesn't occur and the Conrad 30 program is functionally extinct, then I hope we'll consider the physician shortage a little more thoughtfully in whatever policy moves come next. But I'm not that optimistic. I try to avoid talking about politics here, but I'm going to say just one thing. Nowadays, it seems like we live in a country where most of us can tell immediately whether a policy is good or bad just by who proposed it. oh yeah, that's my team, this is a good idea. Or, that's not my team, so it's definitely a bad idea. I mean, whatever the reasons are, I'm going to intellectually backfill them later because I already know what my conclusion is just by who proposed it. And this is not the way that anybody should evaluate any policy. I mean, policies have trade-offs. I mean, like we talked about here, this policy has many, and we've only talked about the very most superficial of them. To decide whether it's good or bad, it depends on how you weigh those trade-offs. And figuring that out is just not something that you should intellectually outsource to your party affiliation. And it feels like too many people are not just willing to do that, but eager. So if you stuck with this video until now, I want to thank you because honestly, you're the very kind of person that I want to reach. I appreciate you spending some time with me. And for now, that's all I've got.